Inside the Napier family massacre, the secrets that led to 5 deaths. The night everything fell apart. You think you've heard true crime stories before? You haven't heard this one. So before the truth disappears, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning what you thought you knew about family. It was the night the storm hit Stips Hill Road, a night so dark and violent that even the trees seemed to bend under its fury. The rain fell in sheets. The wind howled through the narrow valleys of the small Indiana town, and in the middle of it all stood the Napier home, lights flickering, curtains drawn. Inside, 5 lives were hanging by a thread. When officers arrived at the address just past midnight, they were responding to a strange 911 call. A neighbor had reported hearing what sounded like a scream and then silence. The call came from a quiet rural area where people usually minded their own business. But tonight, something was very wrong. As the police cruiser crept up the muddy driveway, its headlights caught something small and still on the road. A child, barefoot, drenched, and trembling. It was Sierra Napier, just 4 years old. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only whispered one thing to the officer, who wrapped her in a blanket. "Daddy's mad." The officers rushed inside the house. The smell of gunpowder and rain filled the air. The front door was wide open, the lock splintered, and the lights inside flickered like a dying heartbeat. What they found inside would haunt the entire department for years. Roy Napier, the father, lay motionless in the living room, his body near the doorway as if he'd tried to protect his family. Angie Napier, his wife, was found in the kitchen, her hand still clutching a phone that had never connected the call. Their teenage son Jacob and daughter Melissa were upstairs, both gone before they could even run. But something didn't add up. The scene wasn't random. It felt personal. The killer hadn't ransacked the house. There was no sign of robbery, no forced entry apart from the shattered lock. Whoever did this knew the layout, knew the family, knew exactly what they were doing. Detective Harold Keene, a 20-year veteran, stepped through the wreckage with a flashlight. He'd seen plenty of horrific scenes in his career, but something about this one made him uneasy. The precision of it, the silence, the sense that the killer hadn't just ended lives, but made a point. And then he found it, a single photograph lying face down on the floor near the sofa. When he turned it over, his stomach twisted. It was a family picture. Roy, Angie, Jacob, Melissa, and Josh. Josh Napier, the eldest son, smiling widely, his arm wrapped around his father. But Josh wasn't in the house. He was gone. At first, investigators thought Josh might be another victim. Maybe he'd escaped into the storm. But the more they looked, the clearer the picture became. In Roy's wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, they found a folded piece of paper, a restraining order. It was against Josh, dated just 1 week earlier. Neighbors began to talk. The Napier family, they said, had been under strain for months. Roy and Josh had been fighting constantly, screaming matches loud enough to be heard across the property line. Roy had accused his son of stealing prescription pills, money, even his truck once. But no one had imagined it could come to this. As dawn broke, the forensic team worked in near silence. Every surface of the home told part of the story. Muddy boot prints in the hallway, shell casings under the coffee table, and a glass of half-finished whiskey on the counter. But the most chilling clue came from the basement. Detective Keene found a broken picture. Frame on the wall, the photo inside missing. The wall beneath it had been marked with something faint, almost invisible under the flickering light. A handprint. Not in blood, but in something else. Grease, maybe. It was smeared, as if someone had touched it while leaving in a hurry. The storm outside finally began to fade, but inside the Napier house, the storm had only begun. Then came the final blow. In a search of Josh Napier's abandoned car, found 2 miles down the road, engine still running, investigators discovered a note in the glove compartment. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "I told him I wouldn't forgive him, and now I won't." Detective Keene froze. The implications were staggering. If Josh had written the note, it wasn't a confession. It was something else, a message, maybe even a warning. And as the sheriff sealed off the property, the question that would grip the nation began to take form. Had Josh Napier killed his entire family out of revenge, or was someone else behind the massacre? The answer was buried somewhere between guilt, betrayal, and the lies no one wanted to admit. What the detectives were about to uncover next would turn the entire case upside down, unraveling the web of lies. You thought you knew the truth, but you're just getting started. The story you've heard is nothing compared to what we're about to uncover. Subscribe now, like, and comment to stay with us through this twisted investigation, because what's coming next will leave you questioning everything. As the investigation into the Napier family massacre deepened, the town of Laurel, Indiana, held its breath. Rumors swirled faster than the winds of the storm that had hit the night of the murders. The Napier family, once a pillar of the community, now lay shattered, and at the center of it all was Josh Napier, the only surviving member of the family. But why was he gone? Where was he hiding? And what secret had driven him to kill, or had he been framed? Detective Keene felt the weight of the case pressing down on him. As more evidence emerged, the puzzle pieces began to fit together in an increasingly disturbing pattern. Everyone seemed to know something, yet no one was speaking. Josh's friends, his girlfriend, and even his extended family members all seemed to be hiding something. But what? Josh's girlfriend, Sandra, was the first to be questioned. She'd been living with Josh in the days leading up to the massacre, but when officers arrived to speak with her, she was nowhere to be found. She had vanished, leaving only a few personal belongings behind, including her phone, which rang unanswered. When Keene finally tracked her down, Sandra's story was fragmented, as though she had been coached. Sandra had been present during the last heated argument between Josh and Wool, but her account of what had happened next was inconsistent. At first, she claimed Josh was home the night of the murders, but later recanted, saying she hadn't seen him for days. She spoke of Josh's temper and his deep resentment toward his father, but insisted that he wasn't capable of huge violence. Yet, there was one detail in her story that bothered Keene. She mentioned, almost casually, that Roy had been involved in something illegal. Something to do with money, pills, and other people, she said, but then quickly shut down, as if realizing she had said too much. The thread of suspicion grew stronger. Keene knew this wasn't just about a son angry at his father. It was about something bigger. Meanwhile, the search for Josh continued. Forensic teams combed through his belongings, looking for any clue that would lead them to his whereabouts. In Josh's room, they found a hidden compartment under the floorboards. Inside, there was a duffel bag filled with cash, a burner phone, and a series of documents, ones that didn't seem to belong to him. They were receipts from a private clinic, and they were dated just a week before the murders. The name on the receipts was not Josh's, but someone else's, a man who had been in trouble with the law before. This discovery only deepened the mystery. Why had Josh been involved with this man? Was there a connection between the drugs, money, and the murders? The town, which had once thought of the Napier family as just another ordinary, struggling family, now realized there were layers to their story, dark ones, buried under years of secrets. Keene dug deeper into the connections between Roy, Josh, and the mysterious man on the receipts, Henry Smith. Henry, a lifelong friend of the Napier family, had been seen regularly visiting their home, but no one knew much about him. When Keene tracked down Henry's family, the truth began to surface. Henry wasn't just a friend, he was involved in the same illicit activities as Roy. Josh had found out about his father's dealings. The betrayal of discovering Roy's criminal side, combined with their long-standing conflicts, had pushed Josh to the edge. But was that enough to push him to murder? The pieces weren't adding up. Keene needed more answers. There were too many dead ends, too many lies. But then, the case took a sharp turn. The missing girl, Sierra, Roy's 4-year-old granddaughter, had been the one to witness the massacre. She had been found wandering the streets, confused and alone. Her words to the police had been chilling. "Mommy and Daddy are sleeping. Everyone's sleeping." But the truth she held was far darker than anyone could have imagined. As Keene looked at the crime scene photos again, a chilling thought crossed his mind. Had Sierra seen more than she was letting on? What had really happened that night? And was Josh the only one responsible, or was there someone else who had played a much larger role in the killings? Keene's phone rang just as he was lost in thought. The voice on the other end was one he hadn't expected. Josh's uncle, who had been suspiciously silent up until now. "I know where Josh is," he said, his voice trembling. "But there's something you need to hear first. And it's not what you think." And just like that, everything Keene thought he knew about the case began to unravel. The chilling truth. The investigation had reached its boiling point. Detective Keene could feel the weight of the case crushing him. What he had once believed to be a straightforward family tragedy now appeared to be something far more sinister, a web of lies, deceit, and buried secrets. And just when he thought he had uncovered it all, a shocking twist emerged that made the truth even more horrifying than he could have imagined. Josh's uncle, Dan, had been in hiding for days after the murders. When Keene received his call, it wasn't just a tip, it was a warning. Dan had information that could change everything. It wasn't just Josh who had a motive for the massacre, it was the entire family dynamic that had been warped beyond recognition. Dan confessed that for years, Roy and his family had been involved in more than just financial struggles. The Napiers were part of an underground drug ring that had been supplying prescription pills to desperate buyers in their small town. But it wasn't just the money, it was the power, the control. The tension had been growing for months between Roy and Josh over who would take over the operation once Roy could no longer handle it. Dan revealed that Josh had been groomed for years to step into his father's shoes. But the last straw had been the betrayal Josh had uncovered, the realization that Roy had been secretly selling pills behind his back. Keene's mind raced. Everything was clicking into place, but there was something still nagging at him. Josh wasn't a cold-blooded killer, was he? He had to have had help. As Keene continued his search, a new lead emerged, a receipt from a storage facility nearby, rented under Josh's name. The facility had been paid in cash, but it had one key detail. There was a hidden locker that no one had bothered to check. Inside that locker, Keene found evidence that shattered everything. It wasn't just Josh involved in the crime. The locker contained more than just money and drugs. It held a journal, handwritten by Roy himself. The journal revealed that Roy had been planning the massacre for months. He had orchestrated his own family's destruction, planning to kill everyone in the house, including himself, so that Josh could inherit the drug operation and run it without interference. Keene's heart sank. The massacre was never just about family turmoil. It was a calculated move by Roy to control his empire. He had pulled the strings, manipulating everyone around him, his wife, his children, even his closest friends. And Josh, unknowingly, had become the pawn in his father's deadly game. But there was still one piece missing from the puzzle. Josh was the one who had killed. He had pulled the trigger on his own family, or had he? Keene turned back to the crime scene photos. Everything was in disarray, but one thing stood out. There were footprints. Multiple sets of prints leading out of the house, disappearing into the woods. Keene's mind began to race again. Was someone else involved in the massacre, or was it something even more twisted? The answer came when Keene revisited the case files. He revisited the statement from Sierra, Roy's young granddaughter. Her words had always haunted him. Mommy and Daddy are sleeping. Everyone's sleeping. But when he went back to the interviews with the family members, he noticed something strange. The police had never asked Sierra about the bloodstains she had been found walking in. Had she seen more than anyone thought? Had she been part of the cover-up? In a final gut-wrenching twist, Keene made a connection between the footprints outside the house and someone no one had suspected. Henry Smith, the family's longtime friend, a man who had been the final one to see Roy the night of the massacre. Keene rushed to Henry, his home, but it was already too late. The man who had been Roy's closest ally was now dead, found hanging in his own garage, an apparent suicide. But Keene knew better. He had been silenced, just as the final piece of the puzzle had been too dangerous to expose. Keene now understood the full extent of the tragedy. Roy's plan had been set in motion long before Josh was even aware. He had orchestrated the massacre to protect his legacy, his drug empire, and to force his son to inherit it. But the true horror wasn't just in the killings. It was in the manipulation, the betrayal, and the final secrets Josh had been left to carry. As Keene looked over the case files one last time, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the secret that had been buried with the Napier family. The truth behind their deaths wasn't just about one man's descent into madness. It was about the destruction of a family by its own hands, driven by greed, lies, and the pursuit of power. Josh had been the one to pull the trigger, but it was Roy's evil legacy that had set the stage. Keene sat back, his mind reeling from the implications. This case would haunt him forever. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe before the next truth disappears.